Snow was still falling when Ethan Cole parked his car outside a small cafe tucked between pine trees. The sign above the door flickered softly in the mountain wind, Aspen Brews. It had been years since he'd set foot in this town. Years since he'd promised himself never to come back. Yet, here he was, wearing a suit that didn't belong in a place that smelled of coffee, pine wood, and old memories. He told himself it was just a blind date, a favor for his sister, nothing more. But as he sat by the window, watching the flakes melt against the glass, something in his chest felt heavier than the winter air. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the strange ache of returning to where everything once began. A bell chimed, the door opened. A woman walked in simple coat, soft scarf, calm eyes that seemed to hold both distance and warmth. She smiled politely, introduced herself as Lily Dawson, and sat down across from him. For a while, they talked like strangers, easy, careful, safe, until she looked at him and said quietly, "You don't remember me, do you?" In that moment, the sound of the cafe faded, only her voice remained, trembling between memory and revelation. And Ethan knew this was not going to be just another blind date. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, the kind that covered everything without a sound. Aspen in late winter looked like a painting roof's dusted white, lights glowing faintly through frosted windows, an air so thin it almost stung when you breathed too deep. Ethan Cole parked his silver SUV beside a lamppost and turned off the engine. For a while, he just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching his breath fog up the glass. He wasn't sure what felt colder, the air outside, or the emptiness he carried inside these days. He could still hear his sister's voice echoing from the night before. Just one date. "Ethan, you've buried yourself in work long enough. She's nice, smart, real. Not one of those networking types." He had laughed it off then, but somehow, against his better judgment, he found himself driving 3 hours through snow just to keep a promise he didn't remember making. The cafe stood at the corner of a quiet street, small, warm light spilling through fogged windows. The kind of place where time slowed down. He hadn't been here since he was 17. Back then, this town had been his whole world, his school, his escape, his mother's laughter in the kitchen of a house 2 miles uphill. Now the house belonged to someone else. His mother was gone, and Ethan had become everything this town never expected him to be: successful, polished, but always tired. He stepped inside. A bell chimed softly. Warm air wrapped around him, thick with the scent of roasted coffee and cinnamon. A young barista behind the counter looked up. "Table for 2. He nodded, scanning the room. Only a few locals sat near the fire, their conversations low and familiar. He chose a table by the window, where snowflakes melted into tiny rivers down the glass. Ethan checked his watch, 6:55. The date was at 7. He hated waiting, hated the awkwardness of small talk, the way people tried too hard to be impressive. But more than that, he hated being seen as Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole and Sterling Logistics. That title always came first, like a shield and a sentence all at once. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and stared at the swirling steam. The bitter smell reminded him of his early days in Seattle, sleeping 4 hours a night, fighting to survive meetings with men twice his age, building an empire from borrowed ideas and unpaid overtime. It had all worked. He had the success, the house, the car, everything except peace. The door opened again. A gust of wind brushed through, carrying snow and the faint scent of pine. He looked up. A woman stepped in, shaking off her coat. She wasn't what he expected. No polished makeup, no glittering heels. Just a simple wool coat, soft brown hair pulled into a low bun, and eyes that searched the room with quiet confidence. She spotted him and smiled gently. "Ethan Cole." He stood automatically. "That's me." Her handshake was warm, firm, without hesitation. "I'm Lily Dawson. Sorry if I'm late. The roads were slippery near the bridge." "It's fine," he said. "I almost turned back myself." They sat. The table felt smaller than it looked. For a few moments, they talked about safe things, the weather, the drive, the kind of chatter people use to fill silence. She asked about his coffee. He asked about her hometown. She lived here, worked part-time at the local library. Her voice carried a calm rhythm, like she'd learned how to make peace with quiet. Ethan found himself relaxing, almost forgetting that this was supposed to be a blind date. She didn't ask about his company, his money, or his so-called success. She didn't seem to care. That, somehow, felt both refreshing and uncomfortable. He studied her face under the soft cafe light. There was something strangely familiar, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened when she spoke, but the memory danced just out of reach, like a name he couldn't recall. Lily paused mid-sentence. Her gaze lingered on him, searching. Then, softly, almost like a sigh, she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" The question landed gently, but it rippled through him like cold water. He blinked. "Should I?" A faint smile touched her lips, not sad, not bitter, just knowing. Maybe not. It was a long time ago. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. A faint unease stirred inside him, the feeling of having walked into a story that had started long before he arrived. The waiter came by with her tea, breaking the silence. Lily thanked him, then turned back, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "I used to live near here," she said, "back when I was little. Things were different then." Ethan nodded politely, though something in her tone made him hesitate. She looked out the window, her reflection blurring against the snow. "You probably wouldn't have noticed me," she continued softly. "Most people didn't." Her words hung between them, not accusing, not dramatic, just quiet truth. And for some reason, it hurt more than if she'd said it angrily. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. He wanted to ask, "Why me? What do you remember?" But he didn't. Instead, he sipped his coffee, its bitterness settling heavy on his tongue. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the world beyond the window. Inside, the cafe grew warmer, but the air around their table felt charged like the moment before a memory returns. Lily smiled again, gentle and self-contained, as if she'd just closed a door only she could see. "Anyway," she said, "thank you for meeting me tonight." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, though she masked it with a small sip of tea. Ethan watched her, a dozen unspoken questions building in his chest. He didn't know what she meant, or why her eyes seemed to hold a kind of sadness that didn't belong to a first date. But he knew one thing, whatever this evening was meant to be, it wasn't going to end like he thought. When Lily stood to leave, she paused by the door and glanced back. The bell chimed softly, the sound almost wistful. Ethan sat there long after she was gone, staring at the half-empty cup between his hands. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the streets, the rooftops, the memories he didn't know he'd left behind. And though he couldn't explain it, something deep inside him whispered this was only the beginning. The coffee had long gone cold, but Ethan didn't notice. The sound of her question still echoed in his head. "You don't remember me, do you?" He sat there for a moment, frozen, eyes fixed on the tiny swirl of cream melting in her cup. There was something in her voice that didn't fit this room, this moment. It carried weight, memory, and something almost tender. Lily smiled, just enough to soften the air between them. "It's all right," she said quietly, stirring her tea. "Most people forget what doesn't matter." Ethan felt a flicker of unease. He searched her face, looking for a clue, a former client, someone from college. No, that wasn't it. Her features held the kind of familiarity you feel before your mind can place it, like hearing a song you once loved but can't remember the words to. Outside, the snow drifted heavier against the window. Inside, their voices lowered, blending with the hush of other conversations. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should remember, shouldn't I?" Lily looked down at her cup. "You were just a boy. You wouldn't—" He leaned back slightly, watching her. The way her hands cradled the warm mug, how her eyes avoided his for a second too long. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she let the quiet do its work, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs until it forces you to feel something. Then she smiled again, small and sad. "You gave me your lunch once, at the library." Ethan blinked. What?" She nodded slowly. "I used to spend afternoons there. I was always hungry, but it was warm, and no one asked questions. You'd come after school a tall boy with a backpack too heavy for one shoulder. You'd leave your sandwich on the table, pretend to forget it, and walk away." Her voice trembled slightly, then steadied. "I never said thank you." For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and a flicker of the past, the smell of old books, the dust motes in sunlight, the sound of his own footsteps on wooden floors rushed back all at once. He had done that, not once, but many times. He remembered now. The girl with tangled hair sitting by the window, pretending to read. He'd been too shy to speak, but he'd noticed her thin wrists, her empty hands. He never knew her name. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That was you." Lily's eyes lifted to meet his, and for a second, the years between them disappeared. "That was me." He shook his head, still trying to piece it together. "That was a long time ago. I didn't think anyone would remember something like that." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But when you're cold and hungry, kindness stays." Her words landed like snow, quiet, weightless, but impossible to ignore. The barista passed by with a soft smile. Another coffee. Ethan nodded without thinking, grateful for the brief distraction. His pulse was steady again, but inside, something had shifted. Lily leaned back, watching him with calm curiosity. "You left town soon after, didn't you?" He nodded. "College in Boston. Then work. Life just kept moving. And now you're back." "Only for a few days," he said quickly, as if that made it less complicated. "My sister insisted on this date. She said Aspen would be a good change of scenery." Lily smiled again, that same gentle, knowing curve of her lips. Funny how life circles back when you least expect it. Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy trying to untangle the strange pull in his chest. This woman, this stranger who somehow remembered him from a time he'd long buried, had just handed him a piece of himself he didn't know was missing. For years, he'd built walls made of money, success, and distance, and now, here she was, walking through them like they were paper. The room grew quieter as the evening crowd thinned. Outside, the streetlights glowed amber against the snow. Lily glanced toward the window. "You used to sit right there," she said softly, nodding to the far corner near the bookshelf. "Always with a math textbook and a cup of cocoa from the vending machine." Ethan chuckled under his breath. It was the only thing that cost less than $1. She laughed lightly, the sound soft and bright, like something warm cracking open. "I remember that too." For a moment, their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. Then Lily looked down, tracing a finger along the edge of her napkin. "It's strange," she said, "how one small act can change the course of someone's life. You probably forgot it by the next day. But for me, it was the first time someone saw me." Ethan didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her that he hadn't meant to be kind, that he'd just been a lonely boy trying to do something that made sense. But the words stayed locked in his chest. The snow outside had turned into a steady curtain, blurring the world beyond the glass. The cafe lights reflected their faces, older, calmer, but still carrying the ghosts of who they used to be. Ethan leaned forward slightly, voice low. "Lily, what happened to you?" After that, she hesitated, then smiled faintly. "That's a story for another time." Tonight's already been enough of a surprise. Don't you think he wanted to ask more where she'd gone, how she'd survived, what had brought her back here, but her tone made it clear she wasn't ready to tell. So, he nodded. All right, another time. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the snowfall blur the streets. When Lily finally stood, she reached for her coat, her scarf soft against her cheek. It was nice seeing you again. Ethan, she said, her voice warm but distant, even if you didn't remember at first. He rose as well, unsure why the thought of her leaving felt heavier than it should. Can I... He stopped himself. Can I walk you to your car? She shook her head gently. It's just around the corner. He hesitated, then smiled. Then, thank you for reminding me. She looked at him, eyes bright but unreadable. Sometimes, we only remember when we're meant to. Then she turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly as she left. Ethan stood there, watching the swirl of snow fill the empty space she'd left behind. For a long time, he didn't move. He just listened to the wind outside, the fading footsteps, and the quiet echo of a past he thought he'd outgrown. Somewhere deep inside, a door creaked open, and though he didn't know it yet, that single question, "You don't remember me. Do you had already changed everything?" That night, the snow didn't stop. It kept falling long after the cafe lights dimmed and the streets grew empty. Ethan sat alone in his hotel room, the faint hum of the heater mixing with the whisper of wind outside. He had opened his laptop twice, tried to answer emails, but every time, his mind drifted back to her face. Lily Dawson, her voice, calm but filled with something old and aching, lingered in his head. You gave me your lunch once, at the library. He tried to remember, truly remember, but all he could summon were flashes the smell of musty books, the sound of pages turning, the echo of his own shoes on the wooden floor, and a shadow near the window. A girl, small, silent, always there after school. He used to wonder why she never spoke to anyone. Maybe he'd been too shy to ask. Maybe he'd been afraid of her sadness. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. It was strange to realize that something he'd done and forgotten had stayed alive in someone else's memory for years. He had built companies, signed deals, been on magazine covers. Yet here he was, being remembered not for the things that made him powerful, but for one quiet act of kindness he barely recalled. The thought unsettled him, and, in some way, it humbled him too. The next morning, the sun peeked through the clouds, turning the snow into sheets of silver. Ethan grabbed a coffee to go and drove slowly past the old parts of Aspen. The town hadn't changed much. Same diner on the corner, same post office, same frozen creek behind the park. But to him, it felt like walking through someone else's memory. He stopped near the public library, the one Lily had mentioned. It was smaller than he remembered, its red brick walls faded, icicles hanging from the roof. The sign out front was tilted, but the windows still glowed warm. For a long time, he just sat there in his car, staring at the entrance, feeling a pull he couldn't explain. Inside, he could almost see his younger self, a boy with too many dreams and not enough courage, sitting in the corner with a backpack full of overdue books. And maybe, somewhere near the window, a girl with tired eyes pretending to read. He closed his eyes. The memory came clearer now. It was a winter afternoon. He'd been eating a peanut butter sandwich while studying for exams. He noticed her thin, quiet, flipping through pages without actually reading. Her stomach had growled softly, and she'd looked down in embarrassment. He had looked away quickly, pretending not to hear. But when he left that day, he'd folded his sandwich in a napkin and left it on the table, pretending he'd forgotten it. She must have found it after he left. He'd done it again the next day, and again. And then life had moved on. Ethan exhaled, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't known it mattered, not then. But maybe it had to both of them. The library door opened, and a couple of kids ran out, laughing, their boots crunching against the snow. Behind them, a woman stepped out bundled in a gray coat, her hair catching the sunlight like soft bronze. Lily. She was carrying a stack of children's books, her cheeks flushed from the cold. For a second, Ethan thought about calling her name, but he didn't. He just watched. Watched the way she knelt to tie a little boy's scarf, the way she smiled at the librarian through the glass, the way she seemed to belong here, quiet, grounded, real. He felt something shift inside him, a kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. That night, back at the hotel, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing her voice, steady and gentle. When you're cold and hungry, kindness stays. He got up, walked to the window, and looked out over the town. The lights twinkled faintly below, scattered like stars fallen into the valley. Somewhere in that maze of snow and roofs was the little library and the woman who had remembered him long after he'd forgotten himself. He thought about how strange it was how one act, done without thought, could echo through time and find its way back to you when you least expected it. He thought about how easily people forget the small things that make them human. And he thought about Lily, the girl in the library who had grown into a woman he couldn't stop thinking about. Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee, black and bitter, just the way he liked it, but tonight, it tasted different, softer somehow. He sat down at the desk, opened his notebook, and started to write not an email, not a plan, but a few simple words. Find Lily, talk to her again. The letters looked strange in his handwriting, uncertain but true. He leaned back, staring at the words, and felt that same quiet pull again, the one that had brought him back to Aspen, to this very moment. Outside, the snow began to fall again, light and steady. Ethan watched it drift past the window, each flake unique, fleeting, but beautiful in its own way. He didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something new, not just for him and Lily, but for the part of himself he had long buried beneath ambition and success. He turned off the lamp, letting the room fade into darkness. Somewhere between memory and hope, a forgotten kindness had begun to glow again, faint but steady, guiding him back to the place he'd once left behind. The morning light crept through the curtains of Ethan's hotel room, painting thin golden lines across the floor. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts had wandered all night from the sound of Lily's voice to the quiet warmth that had filled the cafe when she spoke of the library. Something about her words had settled deep inside him, a memory reborn, gentle but impossible to ignore. By the time he drove back through town, the snow had melted into slush along the sidewalks. Children were walking to school, bundled in bright coats, their laughter echoing off the quiet streets. Aspen had always looked softer in daylight, smaller, slower, like it had chosen peace over ambition. He parked near the library again, telling himself it was just coincidence. But even he didn't believe that. He needed to see her not for closure, but for clarity, to understand what her life had become, and perhaps what his own had been missing. The library doors creaked when he stepped inside. The smell hit him first old paper, pine polish, and that faint trace of vanilla that clung to bookshelves over time. A few locals browsed in silence. The air felt warm, safe, familiar, and behind the counter, sorting a stack of returned books, stood Lily. She looked different in daylight, softer, her hair tied loosely, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She was humming quietly, unaware of him watching. For a man used to glass towers and boardrooms, the sight of her doing something so simple felt almost unreal. When she finally noticed him, her surprise melted into a smile. "Ethan," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You came back?" He nodded, suddenly awkward. "I was in the area." Lily laughed lightly, the sound wrapping around him like sunlight through frost. "In Aspen." "That's quite a coincidence." He smiled. Maybe not. They talked quietly for a while about the town, the snowstorm, the new mural painted near the post office. But as he watched her slip a book back onto the shelf, he saw something behind her, calm, a quiet fatigue, a grace that came from carrying too much for too long. A small voice broke through the quiet. "Mommy, I can't find the dinosaur book." Ethan turned. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, peeked out from behind the reading corner, her dark curls bouncing as she waved a picture book in one hand. Lily smiled, her whole face softening. "Try the bottom shelf, sweetheart." The girl spotted Ethan, froze, then pointed at him with wide eyes. "Mommy? Is that the man from last night? The one with the serious face?" Lily nearly choked on her laugh. "Ava." The girl giggled and ran to her mother, hiding behind her legs but still peeking at Ethan with curiosity. He knelt slightly, offering a small smile. "I'm not that serious." Ava grinned, eyes sparkling. "Mommy said you used to leave sandwiches for hungry people. That's nice." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Did she now? Lily looked both embarrassed and amused. Someone has been eavesdropping on grown-up talk again. Ava shrugged proudly. "I listen with my heart, not my ears." Ethan couldn't help it. He laughed, really laughed. The sound startled even him. It felt lighter than he remembered laughter could feel. Lily watched quietly, her expression soft. She hadn't seen many people make Ava smile like that, not since her father left. For a brief second, she wondered what kind of man Ethan had become to still laugh that way, after all these years. Ava tugged on his sleeve. "Do you read stories sometimes?" Ethan said. "Mostly emails?" "That sounds boring." "It usually is." She handed him a picture book about a dancing dinosaur. "Then you should read this instead. It's more fun." He looked at Lily, who shrugged, smiling. Library rule number 1, never argue with a 5-year-old librarian. He sat down on the small reading rug, the book balanced on his knee, and began to read in a deep, mock-serious voice. Ava giggled every time he made the dinosaur roar too loud. By the 3rd page, she was laughing so hard she fell against his arm. Something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, began to thaw. When the story ended, Ava clapped and whispered, "You're not serious anymore." Lily met his gaze from across the room, her eyes warm but thoughtful. "She's right. You look different." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." They talked a little longer while Ava wandered off to color at a nearby table. Lily mentioned she worked part-time mornings at the library, evenings helping at a small cafe. She didn't say much about her past, but the tiredness in her eyes told him enough. Life hadn't been easy, yet she carried it with grace, never once sounding bitter. Ethan listened, really listened. Every word she spoke seemed to draw him closer, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. She spoke like someone who had learned to make peace with scars. When she mentioned Ava's age, Ethan did the math in his head. 5 years, a single mother. He wanted to ask, "Where's her father?" but something in her tone warned him not to. "Instead," he said quietly, "you've done a good job. She's remarkable." Lily looked down, pretending to straighten a stack of bookmarks. "She's my whole world." There was a pause. Then, softer, she added, "Some days, it's a lot, but she's worth everything." Ethan nodded. "I believe you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside seemed to hush, just the faint sound of Ava humming to herself, crayons scratching softly against paper. He glanced at the shelves, at the worn books, at the place where, years ago, a boy had left a sandwich for a hungry girl. The memory shimmered quietly between them. Real now. Tangible. He finally understood what she had meant, that kindness, no matter how small, can echo across a lifetime. Lily looked up at him, her expression gentle. "You know, back then, I used to think angels didn't exist." Then, a boy left a sandwich on the table and never asked for anything in return. Ethan smiled, his voice low. "I wasn't an angel. I was just a kid with too much peanut butter." She laughed, soft and genuine. Maybe, but you helped me believe in good again. And that kind of gift stays. The words hung between them, simple but heavy with meaning. When Ethan left the library that afternoon, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. He paused by the steps, watching the sunlight glint off the snow. He hadn't realized it before, but the world looked different now, smaller, warmer somehow. As he turned back for one last glance through the glass, he saw Lily helping Ava hang a paper snowflake on the window. The two of them were laughing together, their faces glowing in the amber light. Something in that picture, the softness, the steadiness caught at his chest. He stood there for a long time, until the reflection of his own face blurred into theirs. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was standing exactly where he was meant to be. The morning sky over Aspen was the color of pearl, soft and still, with the faint scent of pine carried through the cold. Ethan drove slowly, one hand on the steering wheel, the other wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. The world outside was quiet, but inside him, something stirred a kind of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. He told himself it was nothing, just another visit, just checking in on an old acquaintance. But deep down, he knew better. Something about Lily and the little girl with the sparkling eyes had stayed with him through the night, as if their laughter had followed him into his dreams. The library was almost empty when he arrived. The sign on the door read, "Open story time at 10 a.m." He stepped inside, the bell above the door giving its usual gentle chime. Warm air met his face, carrying the faint sweetness of old paper and glue. And there she was, Ava twirling clumsily in the middle of the reading area, her pigtails bouncing with each spin. Her shoes squeaked on the linoleum floor as she sang a tune only she seemed to know. When she noticed him standing by the door, she gasped dramatically and pointed. "It's you!" Ethan blinked, taken off guard. "Me." Ava nodded with the seriousness of a small detective. The man with the serious face. "Mommy said you looked like someone who never had ice cream for breakfast." Ethan couldn't stop the smile that crept across his face. "Your mom said that." "Huh." She nodded again, arms crossed. "But you laughed yesterday, so I told her she was wrong." He chuckled softly, crouching to her level. "Well, I guess you proved her wrong then." From behind the counter, Lily looked up, hiding her smile behind a stack of returned books. "Ava, sweetheart, what did I say about spying on people's conversations? That it's rude," Ava replied matter-of-factly. "But I wasn't spying. I was listening with my heart." Lily sighed, shaking her head. "You listen with too many things." Ethan laughed quietly, and Lily caught the sound low, genuine, a little shy. It had been so long since she'd heard laughter like that inside these walls. Ava ran up to him again, tugging his sleeve. "Want to help me pick a dinosaur book? You look like someone who'd like dinosaurs." "Do I?" Ethan said, feigning surprise. "What makes you think that you have dinosaur eyes?" "Dinosaur eyes?" "Yeah, big and serious, but kinda nice, too." He tried not to laugh, but failed completely. "Well, I guess I can't argue with that." She led him by the hand, no hesitation, no fear to the children's corner filled with bright cushions and tiny chairs. Lily watched from behind the counter, a soft ache blooming in her chest. It was rare for Ava to connect with strangers, rarer still for her to feel safe so quickly. Ethan scanned the shelves, fingers brushing over colorful spines. "So, which one's your favorite?" Ava pulled out a book almost half her size. "The Dinosaur Who Wanted to Dance." She handed it to him like it was a treasure. He turned the pages slowly, reading the silly rhymes out loud, exaggerating the dinosaur's voice until Ava's giggles filled the room. When he reached the end, she clapped and leaned against his arm, perfectly content. Lily came over, her tone teasing. "Careful, Mr. Cole. She's going to make you the official storytime reader if you're not careful." He smiled. Could be worse jobs. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, Neither looked away. Something in the air shifted small, quiet, but unmistakable. Lily cleared her throat, glancing toward the front desk. "Can I get you some coffee? Ours isn't as fancy as the city kind, but it's hot." "I'd like that," he said, standing. "If it's not too much trouble." "It's never trouble." She disappeared into the tiny staff room while Ethan watched Ava carefully place the dinosaur book back on the shelf. The little girl hummed to herself, her energy like sunlight caught in motion. When Lily returned, she handed him a steaming mug. Their fingers brushed for a split second, a simple, unintentional touch that sent warmth up his arm. He took a sip. "You make better coffee than most hotels I've stayed in." She laughed softly. "Then you've been staying at the wrong hotels." They stood by the window for a moment, watching flakes of snow drift lazily past the glass. Outside, the world felt distant. Inside, everything was still. Ethan glanced at her. "You seem happy here." Lily smiled faintly. "Most days, yes. It's quiet, peaceful. People come here to find stories, and I guess I've learned that's a kind of healing too." He nodded. "It suits you." Her eyes softened. "And you? Does the city still suit you?" He hesitated before answering. "It used to. Now it just feels loud." There was something in his tone, not regret, but longing. The kind that comes from realizing you've built a life that looks perfect but feels empty. Lily studied him quietly. She saw in his eyes the same boy she once remembered, thoughtful, guarded, kind. The years had changed him, but not the way he carried his silence. Ava suddenly came running toward them, holding a crayon drawing. "Look, it's you and Mommy and the dinosaur." Ethan bent down to look. 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one smiling wide, and a lumpy green creature in the corner. "That's very good," he said, "but the dinosaur's smiling too much. I think he's supposed to be scary." Ava shook her head. "Nope. He's happy because he found his family." The words landed between them like a whisper. Lily looked at her daughter, then at Ethan, her breath catching for a moment. Ethan smiled faintly, but his chest tightened. That small drawing, so innocent, carried a truth he wasn't ready to name. He stood after a while, setting his cup down gently. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, "and the dinosaur lesson." Lily smiled, though her eyes said something quieter. "Anytime. Mr. Cole." Ava ran to the door, waving both hands. "Come back soon." "Okay. The dinosaur needs another story. I'll see what I can do," Ethan said, smiling as he stepped outside. The bell chimed softly behind him. The cold air hit his face, but he didn't mind. His heart felt strangely light, as if something inside him had begun to thaw again. He stood there for a moment, watching snowflakes fall across the town square. Through the window, he could still see Lily and Ava, mother and daughter, framed by the warm glow of books and lamplight. He turned toward his car, but his reflection in the glass stopped him. For the first time in a long while, the man looking back at him didn't seem quite so serious. And deep down, Ethan knew he'd be coming back to that little library again. Not because he had to, but because something there felt like home. The next afternoon carried a soft kind of winter light, the kind that made everything seem gentler, slower. Snow still clung to the rooftops, but the air had warmed just enough for the icicles to drip along the eaves like quiet music. Ethan found himself driving toward the library again, without really deciding to. His mind told him he was just stopping by to return a book Ava had handed him the day before, The Dinosaur Who Wanted to Dance. But somewhere in his chest, he knew it wasn't just about the book. When he stepped inside, the same faint smell of paper and coffee greeted him. The place was quieter today. No story-time crowd, no chatter, just the rustle of pages turning. Behind the counter, Lily looked up and smiled. "You again?" she said, her tone teasing but not unkind. "I think your librarian in training forgot to check this back in," he said, holding up the book. Lily took it gently from his hands, her fingers brushing his for a second, just long enough to make him forget what he was about to say. "Thank you," she said softly. "Ava must have slipped it into your bag again. She's taken quite a liking to you." Ethan smiled faintly. "That seems to be mutual." At that exact moment, a small blur of movement appeared near the children's section. Ava spotted him, squealed, and dashed across the room, her boots thudding against the carpet. "You came back," she cried. "I had to return a very important dinosaur," he said, pretending to whisper. "He missed you." Ava giggled, hopping up and down. "Did he behave? He gets cranky when he's hungry. I gave him extra peanut butter sandwiches. He's fine now." She tilted her head, pretending to think deeply. "Okay, you can be his babysitter then." Ethan laughed, really laughed. The sound startled him, sharp and full and genuine. It wasn't the polite chuckle he gave in meetings or the forced one he used at social dinners. It was real. It came from somewhere deep, long forgotten. Lily looked up from her desk, and for a moment, she just watched him. That laugh, that soft crack of warmth breaking through the armor he always wore, caught her off guard. She hadn't realized how tightly wound he was until she saw what he looked like when he wasn't. The man who had walked into her cafe days ago, all suit and silence, suddenly looked younger, lighter. Ava grinned, triumphant. "Mommy? See, I told you he can smile." Lily raised an eyebrow. "So you did?" Ethan tried to compose himself, still smiling. "Was that a bet?" "More like a theory," Lily said. "Ava thinks everyone who looks serious is secretly hiding their laughter somewhere." "Well," he said quietly, "she might be onto something." Ava twirled again, arms stretched wide. "Told you so." Ethan knelt down, looking at her. "You know, I think you're some kind of magician. You make people forget to be sad." She blinked, considering. "No, I just remind them to play." The words hit him in a way he didn't expect. Simple. Honest. Exactly the kind of wisdom adults forget to keep. He looked up at Lily, who was watching her daughter with a mix of pride and tenderness. Their eyes met a quiet exchange, wordless but full. After a while, Lily closed her ledger and walked over. "You've made her whole morning," she said softly. "Guess I should start charging for smiles," he teased. "Careful," she said. "You might start believing you deserve them." The words lingered. They moved to the reading corner, the three of them sitting together among scattered crayons and open books. Ava sprawled on the floor, drawing stick figures and purple dinosaurs while humming off-key. Ethan leaned back in the little chair that was much too small for him, watching her with quiet amusement. "She's incredible," he said. Lily nodded. "She's 5 going on 40. Sometimes I feel like she's the one raising me." He smiled at that. "You've done a good job." "Lily?" Her gaze softened. "I try." They sat in a comfortable silence. Outside, wind brushed lightly against the windows, and the faint hum of the heater filled the room. There was peace in that stillness, the kind that didn't ask for attention, only presence. Ethan found himself studying Lily's hands as she organized a pile of books. They were slender, quick, with faint lines of wear from long days and quiet strength. He wondered what her life looked like when she wasn't here, what her evenings were like, what her home sounded like when the day ended. Ava suddenly held up her drawing. "This one's for you," she said, handing him a crumpled piece of paper. It was a stick figure version of him, smiling wide, standing next to a purple dinosaur and a little girl in pigtails. He took it carefully, as if it were something fragile. "You made me smile bigger this time." "That's because you did," Ava said. Lily laughed softly, shaking her head. "She doesn't forget anything." Ethan looked at the drawing again. "I think I'll keep it. Might remind me how to smile when I forget." Ava nodded, satisfied. That's what friends are for. Something in that word friends made him pause. It felt strange, unfamiliar, but nice. Later, as the day thinned into afternoon, Ethan helped them stack books and close up the children's section. Lily insisted he didn't need to, but he ignored her protests, finding quiet joy in the smallness of it, the sound of pages sliding into place, the faint scrape of chairs being tucked in. When everything was done, he stood by the door, coat in hand. "I should let you both finish up." Lily smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Thank you. For today." "Thank you," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed it." Her eyes lifted, meeting his gentle, curious. "Needed what?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "To remember what laughter sounds like." Lily's expression softened, and something unspoken passed between them, a warmth that neither dared to name. Ava, already half asleep on a beanbag, murmured without opening her eyes, "He's not serious anymore." "Mommy?" Lily smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, I don't think he is." Ethan chuckled softly, looking once more at the little girl curled up among books and crayons. "Good night, Ava," he whispered. She mumbled something that sounded like "good night, dinosaur man." He turned to Lily, his voice low. "I'll see you soon." "I know," she said quietly. "You will." Outside. The last light of day brushed against the snow, turning it to gold. Ethan walked to his car, the sound of Ava's laughter still echoing faintly in his head. For the first time in years, he caught his reflection in the car window and didn't look away. His own smile surprised him, not perfect, not practiced, but real, and somewhere deep inside, he realized that the thing he'd been missing all along wasn't success or love or redemption. It was something much simpler. The sound of a child's laughter, and the feeling of being seen not for what he'd built, but for who he still was underneath it all. It was late afternoon when Ethan realized the small picture book was still in the back seat of his car. Ava's big adventure with the dancing dinosaur, the one she'd made him promise to return. The sun was dipping low behind the mountains, stretching gold light across the quiet streets of Aspen. He turned down the road that curved along the old oak trees, following the address Lily had once scribbled on a note for a donation receipt. The neighborhood was modest little houses pressed close together, with snow-dusted fences and yards full of forgotten toys. Kids' laughter echoed faintly from somewhere down the block, carried on the wind like a melody that didn't belong to any particular moment in time. He parked in front of a small, weathered house with a blue door. The paint was chipped at the corners, but a pot of daisies half frozen, half blooming, sat stubbornly on the porch. A soft smell of something sweet drifted from the slightly open kitchen window. He hesitated for a moment before knocking. Lily opened the door, wearing a faded gray sweater, her hair tied loosely. "Ethan," she said, surprised but not displeased. "What are you doing here?" He lifted the book. Ava left her dinosaur behind again. "I thought I'd better bring it before he went extinct." Her laughter came easy. "You didn't have to drive all the way out here for that." "I wanted to," he said simply. For a second, she just looked at him, maybe measuring something she didn't quite have words for. Then she stepped aside. "Come in. We were just baking waffles." The warmth of the house wrapped around him as soon as he entered. It smelled like cinnamon and sugar, and something else, something like home. The living room was small but bright, full of handmade things. Drawings covered one wall, taped at odd angles. Dinosaurs, stick figures, stars with smiling faces. A pair of pink rain boots sat by the door. A mismatched quilt lay folded on the couch. It was a world built not with money, but with love. Ava came running from the kitchen, flour on her nose. "You found him," she shouted, hugging the book to her chest. "Mommy said he'd come back if we believed hard enough." Ethan grinned. "Seems like your dinosaur's got good instincts." Lily handed him a plate. "You might as well stay for a waffle. It's a house rule guests don't leave hungry." He hesitated, then took the plate. The waffle was golden brown, dusted with powdered sugar. "You're setting a dangerous precedent," he said. "I might show up every day. Then we'll have to keep extra flour." she replied, smiling. Ava climbed onto the couch beside him, her small legs swinging in the air. Do people in the city eat waffles? She asked, eyes wide. Not like this, he said. Ours come in boxes. That's sad. It is, he admitted. Lily laughed softly from the kitchen. She's not wrong. The sound of her voice in that small room, light, warm, familiar, filled him with something he couldn't name. Maybe peace, maybe longing. After a while, Ava slipped away to her room to play, leaving the two of them sitting across from each other at the small wooden table. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like an old song playing quietly in the background. Lily poured him another cup of coffee, her hands steady. You look different today, she said after a pause, less like a man who's about to run out the door. He smiled faintly. Maybe it's the waffles. Maybe, she said, her tone playful but her eyes thoughtful. Or maybe it's something else. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way she looked at him steady, unhurried, made words unnecessary. He let his gaze drift across the room, the worn sofa, the old lamp patched with tape, the walls that carried both laughter and worry. His eyes landed on a stack of unopened mail on the counter. And there, partly hidden under a magazine, was a white envelope stamped in red Final Notice Property Foreclosure Warning. He hadn't meant to see it. He wished he hadn't. But now that he had, he couldn't unsee it. He looked back at Lily, who was carefully folding napkins, unaware or pretending to be. Her calmness suddenly seemed heavier, like something practiced. You've made a beautiful home, he said quietly. She looked up, surprised by the softness in his tone. It's small, she admitted, but it's ours, every inch of it. He nodded slowly. That's what makes it beautiful. A faint smile crossed her face, but her eyes flickered a tiny shadow passing through. It was gone in an instant, but he caught it. He'd seen that look before in boardrooms, in the eyes of people trying to keep everything from falling apart. Ava's laughter drifted in from the hallway, pure and bright, cutting through the quiet like sunlight through fog. Lily glanced toward the sound, her expression softening. She doesn't know, she said under her breath, almost to herself. And I want to keep it that way for as long as I can. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. He finished his coffee, setting the cup down carefully, and looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman, who had once been a hungry girl hiding in a library, was now standing against the world for her child. She wasn't fragile. She was holding everything together with quiet strength. Lily, he said gently. If you ever need, she stopped him with a look, not cold, but firm. Please don't. I know, she said softly, but I can't take help. Not like that. Not from you. He wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't pity, that it was something deeper, something like gratitude or maybe affection, but he saw in her eyes that it would only wound her pride. So he nodded instead, a quiet acceptance. I understand. And he did, because once he'd been the same, a boy too proud to ask for help, convinced he had to earn every breath of kindness. The air grew still for a moment. Then Lily smiled again, the weight behind it hidden so carefully he almost believed it. Thank you for the book, she said, and for coming. He rose slowly. Thank you for the waffles. She walked him to the door, her hand resting lightly on the frame. Outside, the sky had turned a deep violet, the first stars beginning to shimmer above the mountains. Ava appeared again, barefoot, holding her dinosaur book like a treasure. By Mr. Ethan. Don't forget to smile, I won't. He promised. He stepped out into the cool evening, the door closing softly behind him. For a long while, he stood there on the porch, looking at the little house, its light spilling gently into the snow. Behind those walls were two lives he hadn't expected to care about, two souls bound by quiet resilience. And inside him, Something fragile and unfamiliar stirred the ache of wanting to protect something that didn't belong to him. As he walked back to his car, the wind carried the faint scent of cinnamon, warm and sweet against the cold. He didn't see the light in the window flicker as Lily turned off the lamp. He didn't see her lean against the counter, her eyes closed, holding herself together for one more night. But somehow, he felt it. And as he drove away, he couldn't stop thinking about the words she'd said hours. He wanted it to stay that way. The next day, the sky was pale and still. A hush hung over Aspen, the kind of silence that came before a storm. Ethan stood by his hotel window, staring at the snow-heavy clouds gathering above the mountains. The morning paper lay untouched beside his coffee, headlines blurring into nothing. His mind was somewhere else in a small house with a blue door, where laughter smelled faintly of cinnamon, and where a single envelope on a kitchen counter refused to leave his thoughts. He'd seen the words clearly, final notice. He hadn't meant to. But now they clung to him like cold air, stubborn and heavy. By noon, he found himself back at the library. It wasn't planned. He told himself he just wanted to drop off a few books, maybe see Ava smile again. But when he walked inside and saw Lily bent over a pile of returned donations, her brow furrowed in quiet focus. He knew there was something else pulling him there. "Busy day?" he asked softly. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Always is. The kids' section's getting worn out again. We need more shelves, more books, more everything." Ethan nodded, watching her carefully. "You ever think about asking for funding?" She laughed under her breath. "We ask, we get promises, the promises fade." He hesitated, his hand tightening slightly on the counter. "What if I could help with that?" Lily looked at him, curious. "What do you mean I was thinking?" He began slowly, choosing each word. "I could set up a small reading program here. Something for kids in town, books, supplies, maybe a few events to keep them coming in." Her eyes softened with interest, but only for a second. "That's kind," she said. "But why?" "Because it matters," he said simply. "Because kids like Ava deserve to have a place where stories belong to them." She smiled, faintly but sincerely. "That's a beautiful thought." "Ethan," he took a quiet breath. "I could cover the cost. No one even needs to know it's me." Her smile faded. There was a long pause, not awkward, just heavy. "Ethan," she said gently, "I can't let you do that." He frowned slightly. "Why not?" "Because," she said, setting down the stack of books, "I don't need to be someone's charity project. I've worked too hard for this life, for every piece of it, to have it feel like a favor." Her tone wasn't sharp, but it was steady. "Honest." He started to speak, but she shook her head. "You're kind. I know you mean well. But this place, my work, our home, it has to stay ours. Even if it's small, even if it's barely holding together." Ethan stood there, silent. He understood, maybe more than she realized. He thought of his own mother, how she'd refused help from neighbors after his father's business had failed. How she'd worked nights at the diner until her hands ached, just to keep their house. He remembered the look in her eyes, pride and exhaustion wrapped into something fierce. That same fire burned quietly in Lily now. "I'm not trying to pity you," he said softly. "I just want to help." She nodded, her eyes gentler now but still firm. "I know, but pity and kindness can look the same from the outside, and I can't afford to mistake one for the other." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He looked down, then back at her. "You're right." The quiet stretched between them. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the soft turning of pages from a child nearby. "Finally," Lily sighed, breaking the silence. "You remind me of the boy who used to leave sandwiches in the library," she said softly, "always trying to fix what he didn't break." He smiled, a little sadly. "Maybe I still am." She gave a small shrug. "Some things don't need fixing, just Understanding. He nodded slowly. Then I'll try to understand. Lily's face softened, the tension in her shoulders easing. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan leaned against the counter, his gaze drifting toward the window where snow had begun to fall again, slow, quiet flakes tumbling through the gray light. Do you ever get tired? He asked after a while. Every day, she said, but then Ava laughs, and somehow, that's enough. He smiled. She has that effect. She does, Lily said, her voice warm now. She keeps me honest, reminds me of what matters. And she'd probably tell you the same. He chuckled softly. She already has. For a moment, they just stood there, two people from different worlds sharing the same stillness. He wanted to reach across the counter, to touch her hand not out of pity, but connection. But he didn't. He respected the invisible line she had drawn, one built not from pride, but from the need to stand on her own. The door creaked open then, and a gust of cold air swept in. A few kids rushed inside, shaking snow from their coats, heading straight for the reading corner. Lily smiled, her whole face lighting up. See, she said softly. That's why I do it. He watched her kneel down to help a little boy with his zipper. Watched the way she moved with calm, patient grace. She didn't just work here. She belonged here. And as he watched, something in him shifted, a quiet understanding settling deep in his chest. He couldn't save her. She didn't need saving. But maybe, in his own way, he could still stand beside her the way she had once stood in his memory all those years ago, small and unseen, yet quietly holding on. When she looked back up, he smiled faintly. If I can't donate to the library, he said, at least let me buy the next round of dinosaur books. She laughed softly. We'll see. Is that maybe it's a maybe? She said, her eyes gleaming just enough to make him forget how heavy the air had been a moment before. He nodded, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. I'll take it. As he stepped outside, the cold brushed against his face, sharp but clean. He walked slowly down the steps, his breath rising in faint white clouds. Behind him, through the window, he could see Lily shelving books again, steady, focused, unbending. He thought about her words, I can't afford to mistake pity for kindness. And as he walked toward his car, he realized he understood her better than he'd ever understood anyone. Because once, a long time ago, he'd been proud of surviving on his own too. And now, watching her, he felt something stronger than pity, stronger than admiration, a quiet reverence. For her strength, for her dignity, for the kind of courage that didn't make noise. He started the car but didn't drive yet. He just sat there, watching the snow fall heavier now, each flake landing and vanishing into the white. It struck him then, some people build empires to feel powerful. Others, like Lily, build small lives of grace. And in their silence, there's more strength than the world will ever see. The storm began just after sunset. Clouds rolled down from the mountains, thick and gray, swallowing what was left of the light. By 8 o'clock, the snow had turned to sleet sharp, relentless, driven sideways by wind that howled through the narrow streets of Aspen. Ethan sat in his hotel room, watching the storm through the window when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He almost ignored it. Until he saw her name, Lily, he answered immediately. Hey. There was panic on the other end. Ethan, I'm sorry to call, but her voice broke, breath catching. Ava's sick. She's burning up. I tried to drive her to the clinic, but the car it died near the bridge. I don't know what to do. Ethan was already grabbing his coat before she finished. Text me your location, he said, his voice steady but urgent. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He didn't wait for her reply. The roads were almost invisible beneath the snow. His wipers thrashed back and forth, barely keeping up. He leaned forward over the wheel, eyes fixed on the faint outline of the bridge ahead. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to wait it out. But the thought of Lily stranded in that storm, holding her sick child in the dark, pushed him forward. When he finally spotted the car, an old, pale blue sedan, half buried under snow, he hit the brakes hard. His headlights caught the figure of Lily, kneeling beside the back door, cradling Ava wrapped in a blanket. He jumped out, the wind slicing through his coat. Lily. She looked up, her face pale with fear and cold. Ethan, thank God. He ran to her side. How long has she been like this? Since this afternoon, she said, her voice trembling. Her fever spiked, and then she started shaking. The car just stopped. I tried to call for help, but the signal. Hey, it's okay. He touched her shoulder, firm but gentle. We'll get her to the hospital. Come on. He opened his SUV's back door, helping her climb in with Ava still pressed to her chest. The little girl's skin was flushed, her breath shallow. It's okay, sweetheart, Lily whispered, rocking her softly. We're almost there. Ethan got behind the wheel, turned the heater to full, and drove through the storm like a man chasing time itself. The snow came down thicker, each gust threatening to push them off the road, but he kept going. His jaw was tight, his hands steady. In the rearview mirror, he could see Lily holding Ava close, whispering lullabies through tears. Every now and then, she'd glance at him, that look of quiet desperation that only a parent could know. He didn't speak, he just drove. The hospital lights appeared out of the storm like a promise. He pulled into the emergency entrance, threw the car in park, and ran inside shouting for help. Nurses rushed out with a gurney, voices calm but quick. Within seconds, Ava was in their care, her small hand slipping from Lily's as they wheeled her down the hall. Lily tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her. We'll take care of her. Ma'am, please wait here. Lily's hands trembled. She turned toward Ethan, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked small, fragile. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice low. You did the right thing. They waited together in a sterile waiting room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The storm beat against the windows outside, the world reduced to the hum of fluorescent lights and the ticking of a clock. After a while, a doctor approached, his expression calm. She's stable, he said. High fever. But we've brought it down. We'll keep her overnight for observation. Lily exhaled shakily, pressing a hand over her heart. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan nodded at the doctor. Send the bill to me. Lily turned sharply. Ethan, no. You can't, I can, he said quietly. And I will. She looked at him, torn between gratitude and pride. Please, I'll pay it back. Every cent. He met her gaze steadily. You don't owe me anything. But she shook her head, eyes bright with stubborn tears. Don't do that. Don't make me feel small. I can take care of us. Her voice cracked, but her resolve didn't. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to tell her that this wasn't about pity, that it wasn't even about her anymore. It was about a child who deserved warmth, safety, tomorrow. But he knew words wouldn't change what was written in her pride, so instead, he just nodded. All right, he said softly. You'll pay me back. Someday. Her shoulders dropped, a sigh escaping her lips, not relief, but acceptance. Thank you, she murmured. Hours passed. The storm outside began to fade, replaced by a quiet drizzle of melting snow. Lily sat beside Ava's hospital bed, brushing damp curls from her forehead. The little girl stirred, mumbling something in her sleep. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitors. Lily looked exhausted, her sweater damp, her hair clinging to her temples. Yet there was a strength in her that took his breath away, the kind of strength that didn't shout, but endured. He walked in quietly, placing a cup of hot cocoa on the table beside her. She glanced up, eyes soft but wary. You should rest, he said. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. He nodded. Then I'll sit with you. She smiled faintly, too tired to argue. You really don't give up, do you? Not on people who matter, he said simply. They sat together in silence, the only sound the slow, steady rhythm of Ava's breathing. For a long time, neither spoke. Eventually, Lily's head began to drift, her body swaying with exhaustion. Without thinking, Ethan reached out, steadying her. Her hand found his, not deliberate, just instinct. When she finally fell asleep, he stayed there, unmoving, her hand still resting against his. He looked down at the small family before him, mother and child, and something inside him shifted again, deep and quiet. He had spent years chasing control, success, certainty, but sitting there, in a dim hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and rain, he understood something new. Sometimes love didn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it came quietly through a late-night drive, a steady hand, and a promise kept without needing thanks. When dawn finally broke, the storm was gone. The first light slipped through the blinds, falling across Lily's face as she slept beside her daughter. Ethan stood, stretched quietly, and stepped out of the room. At the front desk, he left his credit card without a word. For Ava Dawson, he said, no records, no receipts. The nurse nodded, understanding. Outside, the world smelled of wet earth and thawing snow. Ethan drew in a deep breath, watching his breath cloud in the cold air. He didn't need her gratitude. He didn't even need her to know what he'd done. It was enough that they were safe. And as he walked toward his car, the sky breaking open with pale morning light, Ethan realized that some debts were never meant to be repaid. Some were simply meant to be carried quietly, like a secret between hearts. The night stretched long inside the hospital room. The lights were dimmed, the machines hummed in steady rhythm, and outside the window, snow still drifted down in quiet sheets. It was the kind of silence that made every small sound, every breath, every sigh feel like it mattered. Ethan sat beside the bed, his coat draped over the chair, a thin children's book open in his hands. Ava's small fingers rested over his wrist, her skin still warm but no longer burning. The fever had broken, but she was weak, her voice barely a whisper when she spoke. "Can you read me one more?" she asked, eyes fluttering. He smiled softly. "You sure you're not tired yet? I'm not," she murmured, though her eyelids said otherwise. He cleared his throat and began to read, his voice low and gentle, carrying the rhythm of the story through the stillness. It was a book about a little bear who couldn't find his way home in the snow, but who finally did because someone kept a lantern burning for him. Halfway through, Ava's hand slipped from his wrist. Her breathing grew slow. Ethan paused, watching her tiny chest rise and fall beneath the hospital blanket. A small strand of hair had fallen across her forehead. He brushed it back carefully, the gesture almost reverent. Outside, the wind sighed against the glass. Inside, there was only warmth from the doorway. Lily stood watching. She hadn't meant to interrupt, but the sound of his voice had stopped her just beyond the frame. She leaned quietly against the wall, hands clasped to keep them from trembling. The scene before her felt almost unreal. Ethan, the man who once seemed carved out of ambition and distance, sitting in a dim hospital room, reading to her daughter as if he'd been doing it all his life. There was nothing performative about him now. No show of strength, no gesture of pride, just presence. Lily blinked back the tears that stung her eyes. She'd known men who wanted to fix things, men who made promises wrapped in guilt or expectation. But this quiet care was different. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was simply there. Ethan closed the book, his voice dropping to a whisper as he read the final line. And the little bear realized he'd never really been lost at all. He sat for a moment, looking at the cover, lost in thought. Then, without turning, he said softly, "She's going to be fine." Lily started, surprised that he knew she was there. "How did you?" He smiled faintly. "I heard you breathing." She stepped closer, her shoes quiet on the tile. "I didn't mean to listen in. I'm glad you did." She stopped beside him, her eyes moving from Ava to the open book on his lap. "She likes that one," she whispered. "I used to read it to her when she was little. Said the bear reminded her of herself." He chuckled softly. "Lost, but brave. Exactly." They stood there together, side by side, the hum of the machines filling the quiet between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Lily said, barely above a whisper, "You didn't have to stay. I know. You didn't have to do any of this. I know that too." She looked at him then. Really looked the tired eyes, the unshaven jaw, the weariness that came not from the long night but from something deeper. Yet beneath all that, there was gentleness, something she hadn't noticed before. "Why are you like this?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Like what? So kind," she said, searching for the right word. Quietly kind. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Maybe because I've met people who weren't, and I remember what that felt like." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Lily looked down, her throat tight. "You remind me of my father," she said. "He used to say the same thing, that real kindness never asks to be seen." He turned toward her, his expression softening. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she whispered. "He would have liked you." They both smiled then, a quiet, fragile smile that said more than words could. After a while, Lily sat down in the chair beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on her daughter's sleeping face. "You know," she said after a pause, "I used to think people like you and me lived in different worlds." Ethan tilted his head. "And now I think maybe we just took different exits on the same road." He nodded, letting the thought settle. Ava stirred, mumbling something in her sleep, half dream, half memory. Lily reached out, smoothing her daughter's hair. Ethan watched her, the tenderness in every movement, the way she seemed to carry love and exhaustion in equal measure. And in that moment, something inside him quietly gave way, not a crash, not a revelation, just a slow opening, like a door he hadn't realized was closed. He leaned back, eyes still on Lily. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. She glanced at him, shaking her head. "No, I just don't have a choice." He smiled gently. "That's what strength looks like." The room fell quiet again. Outside, dawn began to edge its way into the sky, a pale light brushing against the frost on the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm. Ethan looked at Ava once more. "She'll wake up soon." "I know," Lily said, her voice full of quiet faith. He stood, stretching slightly. "I'll get us some coffee." She looked up quickly. "Ethan, wait." He turned, and she hesitated, then said softly, "Thank you." He gave a small nod, but his eyes held something deeper. "You don't need to thank me, Lily. You'd have done the same." When he left, the door clicked softly behind him, and Lily sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The room felt lighter somehow, warmer. She looked at her daughter's sleeping face, then at the empty chair where Ethan had been. There was something different about that space now, as if it still held the echo of his voice, the steadiness of his presence. And for the first time in a long while, Lily let herself cry, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the strange relief of knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Outside the room, Ethan stood in the hallway, watching the first light of morning filter through the frosted glass. He didn't think of the hospital bills, or the sleepless night, or even the cold waiting beyond those doors. All he could think of was how, for the first time in years, he wasn't trying to fix something. He was simply there, and somehow, that felt more right than anything else in his life ever had. Down the hall, a nurse passed, offering him a tired smile. "You can rest now," she said softly. He nodded, though his eyes remained on the door. "Yeah," he whispered. "Maybe I finally can." And inside that small hospital room, behind the glass, Lily looked up just once more, catching sight of him, before he turned away. Her lips moved soundlessly, shaping a single word he didn't hear, but somehow felt stay. A few days after the storm, the sun returned to Aspen. The snow had begun to melt, leaving soft puddles along the sidewalks and the faint scent of pine and thawing earth in the air. The world felt slower, gentler like it, too, was taking a deep breath after holding still for too long. Ethan met Lily and Ava by the lake that afternoon. Ava was already running ahead, her red scarf streaming behind her like a ribbon of joy. She laughed as she chased the ducks that waddled along the edge of the water, her voice bright and free. "She's completely recovered," Ethan said, watching her. Lily nodded, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "Kids bounce back faster than we do. She was asking about you before she even left the hospital." He smiled, a quiet warmth flickering behind it. "That's good to hear. I was starting to think she only liked the dinosaur books." "She likes people who make her feel safe," Lily said softly. Ethan glanced at her, the words lingering longer than she probably meant them to. The lake shimmered under the pale afternoon light, a few patches of ice still floating near the shore. He could hear the soft creak of the wooden dock and the distant whistle of a train climbing the mountain. Everything about the moment felt fragile, like something you shouldn't speak too loudly in, for fear of breaking it. They walked for a while without talking. The sound of their steps on the gravel path filled the silence. Ava's laughter faded into the distance as she stopped to toss pebbles into the water. Then Lily said quietly, "You've been very kind to us, Ethan, more than anyone else has in a long time." He shook his head slightly. "Kindness doesn't always need a reason." "Still," she said, looking at him, "I feel like I should understand it. You help people like it's second nature." He stopped walking, his breath clouded in the cold air. "It's not," he said after a pause. "It wasn't always?" She turned toward him, curious. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the water. "I guess. I learned kindness the hard way." There was a stillness in his tone that made her heart slow. He looked down at his hands, almost as if he were seeing something far away. "My dad was a dreamer." He began quietly. Big ideas, small follow-through. He owned a small construction company here in Aspen. When I was a kid, we lived well until we didn't. He invested everything in one project. It failed. We lost the house, the business, everything. And when that happened, he paused, the memory thick in his voice. He wasn't the same. He started drinking. I tried to fix things. You know, I was 16, trying to be the man of the house when I was barely a man at all. Lily's eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "My mom got sick a year later," he continued, "and we didn't have insurance. I remember standing outside the hospital one night, trying to figure out how to pay for her medicine. She died before I could. After that, I left Aspen. I told myself I'd never come back until I could build a life where nothing, no one could ever make me feel helpless again." He let the words hang there. The wind picked up, rippling the surface of the lake. Lily's eyes glistened. "You've been running from that feeling ever since," she said softly. He nodded. "Maybe. I thought success would fix it. I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, I could control everything. And did it." He looked at her then, his eyes tired but honest. "No." It just made the silence louder. She didn't say anything for a long time. They stood there, side by side, watching Ava toss another pebble into the water, her laughter carried away by the breeze. "Finally," Lily said. "You know, when I was little, I used to believe people were either good or bad. But growing up teaches you something else. Sometimes people are just broken in different ways, trying their best to hold the pieces together." Ethan smiled faintly. That sounds about right. She looked at him, her voice quieter now. You're not broken. Ethan, you just forgot you don't have to carry everything alone. He turned toward her fully then, the sunlight catching the edges of his face. Maybe I just needed someone to remind me. Lily held his gaze. There was no pity there, only understanding. They started walking again, slower this time. Ava had moved farther down the path, crouched near the water, humming to herself. The sun was dipping lower now, casting a golden shimmer across the lake. Do you ever regret leaving? Lily asked. Every day, he said simply. But I also think I had to. If I hadn't, maybe I'd still be that scared kid who didn't know how to help anyone. She smiled softly. And now you do. He shook his head. Now I'm learning. For a moment, the world felt smaller, just the crunch of snow under their feet, the whisper of wind through the trees, and the sound of their breaths syncing with each other's. Lily stopped suddenly, glancing at Ava. You've been carrying that story alone for a long time, haven't you? He looked down, his voice low, long enough that I almost forgot how to tell it. Maybe telling it is how it stops owning you, she said. Ethan looked at her again, her face framed by the soft winter light. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. The truth of her words settled quietly between them. They reached a wooden bench overlooking the lake and sat down. Ava ran back to them, cheeks flushed, holding a handful of pebbles. Look, Mommy, I found ones shaped like hearts. Lily laughed, brushing the snow from the bench beside her daughter. You have a good eye, sweetheart. Ava held one up toward Ethan. This one's for you, she said proudly. It means you're not sad anymore. He smiled, taking the tiny stone between his fingers. I'll keep it. Lily's eyes softened. Looks like she's already decided you're family. He laughed quietly, but something in his chest caught. I don't know what I did to deserve that. Maybe you don't have to do anything, she said. Maybe she just sees who you really are. The sun sank lower, turning the water to gold. Ava started humming again, spinning in small circles, her scarf trailing in the air. Ethan watched her, and then looked at Lily. You were right, he said. About what? About people being broken in different ways. I think maybe we help each other find the missing pieces. Lily's eyes met his. Maybe that's what love is. The words lingered, fragile and unspoken between them. As the last of the sunlight faded and the first chill of evening set in, Ethan slipped the heart-shaped pebble into his pocket, feeling its small weight against his palm. And for the first time in years, his heart didn't feel like something cracked open by loss. It felt like something slowly learning how to heal. When they finally turned to walk back toward the parking lot, Ava skipped ahead, her laughter ringing out through the cold air. Lily glanced at Ethan, her breath misting in the twilight. He smiled. What? She shook her head, a small smile curving her lips. Nothing. Just, it's been a long time since I've seen you look like that. Like what? Like someone who's home. He didn't answer. He just kept walking beside her, their footsteps falling in rhythm, the lake behind them glinting with the last light of day, a quiet witness to two hearts slowly finding their way back. The wind had turned sharp again, sweeping through the streets of Aspen with a bite that hinted winter wasn't done yet. The sky was a pale gray, heavy with clouds that pressed low over the town. Inside the library, Lily was stacking returned books when the front door creaked open. The bell above it chimed soft, familiar, but the sound made her look up too quickly. She froze. Standing in the doorway was a man she hadn't seen in nearly 6 years. The kind of man whose face you try to forget, but never fully can. His hair was shorter now, his jacket expensive, but his eyes, those same dark, restless eyes, hadn't changed. Hi, Lily, Mark said, his voice casual, as if he'd just stopped by to borrow a book. The air left her lungs. What are you doing here? He stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. I heard you were still in town. Took me a while to find you. She forced her voice to stay steady. You shouldn't have. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. You look good. Different. Older, I guess. She straightened. You should leave. Mark. He glanced around the library, his hands sliding into his pockets. You always liked quiet places. I remember that. Don't pretend to remember anything, she said softly, the words cutting through the air. He laughed under his breath. Fair enough. But I do remember Ava. Her pulse quickened. Don't you dare, I just want to see her, he said quickly, raising a hand. That's all? I deserve that much, don't I? Lily shook her head. You don't deserve anything. You left before she could even walk. His smile faltered, but only slightly. Things were complicated. Things were convenient, she shot back. The silence between them stretched. Somewhere in the children's corner, a small clock ticked. Mark looked down, then met her eyes again. Colder now. I've changed. Lily, I'm doing better. I have a stable job, a place in Denver. I want to make things right. She took a step back, her fingers tightening on the edge of the counter. You can't make right what you abandoned. He sighed. You can hate me all you want, but I'm still her father. I have rights. The words hit her like ice water. She whispered, Don't, but he was already walking closer. I talked to a lawyer, he said. They told me I could file for partial custody. I just came to give you a heads up out of respect. Respect. She let out a shaky breath. You call this respect? He shrugged. It doesn't have to get ugly. Lily, we can work something out. Her voice cracked, low and trembling. You think you can just come back into her life after everything and work something out? He looked at her, expression unreadable. I'm her father. Whether you like it or not. The door opened again just then, and Ethan stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He stopped short at the sight of them. Lily turned toward him instinctively like someone reaching for air after being underwater too long. Ethan. Mark followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. So, this is him? Ethan's eyes flickered between them, reading the tension in an instant. Everything okay? Lily swallowed hard. We were just finishing up. Mark smiled thinly. I'm sure you were. He looked Ethan over the calm stance, the quiet steadiness, and his tone turned sharp. Guess this is the guy who thinks he can replace me. Ethan didn't rise to it. I'm not here to replace anyone. Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then maybe stay out of what isn't your business. Lily's hand trembled slightly on the counter. Stop it, both of you. Ethan's tone remained level. I think you should go. Mark laughed once, a low, bitter sound. You think you can tell me what to do? Lily moved between them, her voice shaking. Please, just go. Mark's eyes lingered on her for a long second. Then he smiled, slow and cruel. You always did like men who play the hero. He turned and left, the bell over the door ringing once more, sharp and final. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Ethan looked at her, his voice quiet. Lily. Who was that? She sat down slowly, the strength draining from her body. A mistake, she whispered. A part of my life I thought was over. He waited. Finally, she said, that was Ava's father. The words came out brittle, like glass breaking. Ethan exhaled slowly, sitting beside her. He said something about custody. She nodded, staring at the floor. He's bluffing. He has to be. Do you believe that she didn't answer? He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Lily, you don't have to face this alone. I can help. I have lawyers? No, she said quickly, her voice rising. You can't. He frowned. Why not? Because then it becomes your fight, she said, her voice trembling. And I can't let that happen. I won't owe you that. Ethan's expression softened. This isn't about owing me anything. It's about protecting Ava. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. He'll use anything anyone to make me look unfit. If he finds out you're helping, he'll twist it. He'll say I'm unstable, that I'm relying on another man to raise his child. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that no court would believe him. But he saw the fear in her eyes, not panic, but the deep, worn fear of someone who's already had too much taken. He sat back, silent. For a long moment, all they could hear was the faint hum of the heater, the wind pressing softly against the windows. Finally, Ethan said quietly, "If you ever change your mind." She shook her head. "I won't." "Lily, please," she whispered. "Don't make this harder." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Okay." When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for caring. But some battles I have to fight on my own." Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her no one wins wars fought alone. But instead, he said nothing. He just stood, gave her a small, heavy nod, and walked toward the door. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and relentless. He paused on the steps, looking back through the window. Lily was still sitting at the counter, her hands clasped, her shoulders trembling under the weight of something she wasn't ready to share. And for the first time since he'd come back to Aspen, Ethan felt truly powerless. He'd built his life on control, on fixing things, managing outcomes, rescuing broken stories. But this time, the story wasn't his to save. The snow gathered on his shoulders as he walked to his car. Behind him, the light from the library window glowed against the dark, flickering with every gust of wind, a fragile flame holding out against the storm. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew this was only the beginning of the fight. The courthouse in Aspen sat quietly beneath a thin veil of snow, its old brick walls carrying the weight of years and stories that began and ended inside. From the outside, it looked peaceful. But to Ethan, standing across the street with his collar turned up against the wind, it felt like the world was holding its breath. He didn't go in. He couldn't. Lily had made that clear. This was her battle, her line in the sand. And though every part of him wanted to be beside her, he knew sometimes love meant standing back, holding the rope without pulling it. Still, he wasn't idle. Weeks before the hearing, he'd sat in his office late into the night, the city lights of Seattle flickering behind him like a restless sea. The snow outside his glass windows looked nothing like Aspen's colder, cleaner, emptier. On his desk were two things: a letter from Lily refusing his help, and a contact card from an old friend who specialized in family law. He turned the card over between his fingers for a long time before dialing. When the man answered, Ethan's voice was steady. "I need someone to handle a custody case." Quietly. The friend hesitated. "For you." "No," Ethan said, "for someone who'd never ask." He didn't mention names. Didn't have to. The less said, the better. A week later, legal documents began moving in the shadows, paperwork that would never trace back to him. Accounts opened discreetly, fees covered under charitable programs that no one could tie to his company. And among them, a new name appeared in the records of the Aspen Community Foundation, Ava's Future Fund, a scholarship for underprivileged children, registered under the library's name. Lily never knew who created it. But that was the point. He followed every update from afar. Each call from the lawyer was short, precise, clinical, yet every word carried weight. The father's lawyer filed a petition today. The hearing's been delayed. It's moving in your favor. And then, one morning, the call came that made his heart stop. "It's over," the lawyer said. The judge ruled full custody to the mother. The case is closed. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He just leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, feeling the tension drain from his chest in slow, uneven breaths. He didn't ask for details, didn't need to know how it unfolded, whether Lily cried, whether Mark yelled, whether the courtroom smelled of wood polish and nerves. He only needed to know she'd won. That night, He walked the streets of Aspen alone. The town was quiet, a few shop windows glowing under soft lamplight. He passed the library, its front steps covered in snow. Inside, the lights were still on. Through the window, he could see Lily at the counter, Ava asleep on her lap, a small blanket draped over the child's shoulders. He stopped across the street, watching them. Lily's hair fell loose around her face. And though she looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from months of carrying something heavy, there was peace there too. The kind that comes after the storm, when you finally realize the worst has passed and you're still standing. She reached down, brushing a strand of hair from Ava's forehead, her hand trembling slightly. Then, as if feeling something, she looked up out the window, eyes searching through the dimness. Ethan stepped back into the shadow of a nearby tree, not wanting her to see him. For a moment, she kept looking. Then, slowly, she smiled a small, knowing smile, like someone who sensed the presence of kindness even when it hid itself. She turned off the desk lamp, gathered Ava into her arms, and disappeared into the back room. Ethan stayed there a while longer, watching the light fade behind the curtains. He thought about the letter she'd once written to him, short, firm, filled with pride. "Don't fight for me. I can stand on my own." And she truly had. He turned toward his car, the snow crunching under his boots. But before he left, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a check unsigned, unmarked, made out to the library foundation, under the name Ava's Future. He slid it into the mail slot by the door. Then he stood there a moment longer, looking up at the window where the light had gone out. "Good job." "Lily," he murmured, his breath a faint cloud in the cold air. "You did it." The wind picked up, scattering flakes across the street. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang the hour. He drove back to his hotel, the mountain roads winding beneath the moonlight. The radio played low, an old jazz tune he didn't recognize, and for the first time in months, he felt something like calm. But under that calm, there was still ache, not from loss exactly, but from distance, from loving someone enough to help her win without letting her know she hadn't been alone. A few days later, a letter arrived at the library. No name on the envelope, just the return address of a local law firm. Lily opened it slowly, her hands shaking before she even knew why. Inside was a short note. "Congratulations on your case. Your legal expenses have been fully covered by an anonymous benefactor. Please extend our best wishes to you and your daughter." Her breath caught. She sank into the nearest chair, reading it again, then again. There was no signature, no clue. But somehow, she already knew. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the snow in gold, she sat by the window with Ava curled against her side. The child looked up sleepily. "Mommy, did we win?" Lily smiled faintly. "Yes, sweetheart, we won." Ava grinned, nestling closer. "Then can we bake cookies tomorrow?" "Of course we can." But even as she spoke, Lily's eyes drifted to the window, to the mountains in the distance, and the thought of a man who kept his promises quietly, like a prayer whispered instead of spoken. She whispered under her breath, so soft that only the air could hear, "Thank you." And somewhere, miles away, Ethan felt the echo of those words not in sound, but in the stillness that settled over him, warm and steady. He didn't need to see her to know she was safe. Didn't need her thanks to know he'd done the right thing. Sometimes love wasn't about being seen. It was about standing in the dark, making sure the light stayed on for someone else. And as he looked out over the snowy streets of Aspen one last time, Ethan smiled quiet, content, the kind of smile that comes when you finally stop needing the world to know your heart. Because one person, somewhere, already does. It was early spring in Aspen when the truth finally found its way to Lily. The snow had begun to melt, leaving streams of water running down the sidewalks, glinting like thin ribbons of glass beneath the afternoon sun. The air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. The town was waking up again, and for the first time in months, she felt she could finally breathe. The custody case was behind her. The papers were signed. The court's decision stood firm. Ava was hers, truly hers, no longer a shadow hanging over her every breath. Life had started to take on a quiet rhythm again, mornings at the library, afternoons baking with Ava, evenings when the world seemed soft and forgiving. But even in that calm, something had begun to stir, a small, persistent question that refused to let her rest. It began with a phone call. She was at the library organizing a new batch of donated books when the call came through. "Mrs. Dawson," a man's voice said, polite and crisp. "This is Paul Henderson from the Aspen Community Foundation. I'm calling to confirm your acknowledgement of the Ava's Future Fund." Lily frowned slightly, tucking the phone closer to her ear. "I'm sorry. The what?" "The scholarship," the man explained. "The one that was established last winter in your daughter's name. It's customary for the family to sign the renewal documents each spring. We've just received another sizable contribution." Her heart stuttered. "Another contribution?" "Yes," he said cheerfully. "Quite generous, actually. The same donor as before, Mr. Ethan Cole." For a moment, everything around her went still. The quiet hum of the library, the whisper of pages turning somewhere down the aisle, even her breath. "I see," she said softly, her voice barely holding. "Thank you for letting me know." When she hung up, her hand was trembling. She sat there for a long time, staring at the phone as if it had just spoken a secret she wasn't ready to hear. The warmth of understanding spread through her chest, tangled with something else, disbelief, gratitude, maybe even hurt. Ethan, of course it was him. The anonymous legal help, the sudden settlement that came right when she'd been out of money, the fund, the quiet donations, the unseen hands that had carried her through the storm, all of it led back to him. She felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. And yet, deep down, maybe she had known all along. Maybe she'd simply chosen not to name it. That evening, after Ava fell asleep, Lily stood at her kitchen window, watching the twilight settle over the town. The lights from the mountains flickered in the distance. She pressed her hands against the cool glass and whispered to herself, "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan. The next morning, she found herself standing outside his office. It was tucked above the same coffee shop where they'd first met, that little corner of serendipity that had started everything. She hesitated before going in, her heart knocking softly against her ribs. Inside, the air smelled faintly of roasted beans and pine furniture. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last, until she reached his door. She didn't knock right away. Then she did. Ethan looked up from his desk when she entered. He was surprised, but not startled, as if he'd known this moment would come. "Lily," he said gently. "Hi." She closed the door behind her. "You should have told me." He blinked. "Told you what about the lawyers? The scholarship? All of it." Her voice trembled, quiet but steady. "I found out." Ethan exhaled, leaning back slightly in his chair. He didn't look ashamed, only calm, maybe a little sad. "I wasn't trying to hide it," he said softly. "I just didn't want you to feel indebted." "Indebted?" She shook her head. "Do you think that's what this is about? I thought we were." She stopped, searching for the right word, honest with each other. He stood, walking to the window. The light caught the side of his face, outlining the lines near his eyes. "I meant it when I said I wanted you to fight your own battles," he said. "And you did. But sometimes even the strongest people need a hand they don't see. That's all I wanted to be." Lily's throat tightened. "You did all that for us, without asking for anything." He turned toward her then, his voice low, almost tender. "I didn't want anything. Lily, I just wanted you and Ava to be okay." There was silence. Not the heavy kind, the quiet kind that holds truth inside it. She took a slow step toward him. "You helped me win back my life, and you didn't even want me to know. I just wanted you to have peace, he said. That was enough. She looked at him for a long time, this man who carried his kindness like a secret, who gave without asking for thanks, who loved in ways that didn't draw attention. Her voice softened. Do you know what it feels like? Ethan, to realize someone has been protecting you in silence. He smiled faintly. Probably not as much as I know what it feels like to finally see you smile again. Something inside her cracked, not with pain, but with relief. Tears filled her eyes, unbidden. You didn't have to do it, she whispered. I know, he said quietly, but I wanted to. For a long time, they just stood there, two people who had once been strangers in a coffee shop, now bound by something far deeper than circumstance. Outside, the morning sun was rising higher, painting the mountains gold. A gust of wind rattled the window, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and thawing snow. Lily took a breath, steadying her voice. You could have told me, she said again, though now it wasn't an accusation, it was something softer, almost forgiving. He nodded. Maybe. But I didn't need you to know. I just needed you to be free. She wiped her eyes and gave a shaky laugh. You really are impossible. He chuckled quietly. So, I've been told. She stepped closer, close enough to see the tired kindness in his eyes. You changed everything, Ethan. Not just for me, for Ava, for both of us. He looked down, his voice a whisper. You changed me first. The air between them grew still warm, suspended, filled with the unspoken understanding that no grand gesture could ever match what had already been given. Lily reached out then, her fingers brushing against his hand, a simple gesture of gratitude that said everything words couldn't. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he turned his hand over, holding hers gently. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, the mountains stood steady against the pale blue sky, quiet witnesses to a truth finally brought into the light. And as they stood there, hands intertwined, Lily whispered half to herself, half to him. You never wanted recognition. You just wanted us to be okay. Ethan nodded, his eyes warm. That's all I ever wanted. The moment lingered, quiet and golden, like sunlight through the first open window of spring. And though neither said the words, they both knew this quiet honesty, this tenderness found through struggle was love, in its truest form. Spring turned into summer, slowly, the way it does in the mountains one soft morning at a time. The snow that had once blanketed Aspen was gone now, replaced by meadows of wildflowers stretching along the roadside. The scent of pine mixed with coffee and rain, and in the heart of town, above the same small cafe where it all began. A new sign hung in the window, Cole and Partners Consulting. Ethan stood by the front window of his new office, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. From here, he could see everything that mattered: the cobblestone street, the cafe terrace below, and across the way, the public library, its old clock ticking faithfully through the morning quiet. He smiled to himself. It was strange, after all those years of skyscrapers and boardrooms, that this little corner of Aspen felt more like success than anything he'd ever built in Seattle. He'd kept his promise to slow down, to live differently. Half the month he stayed in Aspen now, the other half in Seattle where his main firm still operated. But whenever he returned here, to the place where the mountains held the clouds close, he felt something in him settle. His desk was simple, no glass, no steel, no city skyline behind it. Just wood, sunlight, and a single photo frame, Lily and Ava, sitting on the library steps, both grinning at the camera. Ava was holding a stack of books almost as tall as her hair wild, her eyes bright. He'd taken the photo himself one afternoon when she'd insisted he be her official photographer for the day. He looked at it now and smiled. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said. Lily stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups. "I come bearing caffeine." Ethan grinned. "You read my mind." She handed him a cup and glanced around the office. "You've really made it your own." He shrugged lightly. "It's a work in progress, but it feels right." "It does," she said. Her eyes softened as she looked out the window. "It suits you, this view, this pace." He leaned against the desk, watching her. The morning light fell across her hair, and for a moment he just let himself take in the quiet of it, how easily she seemed to fit into the room, as if she'd always been a part of it. "How's Ava?" he asked. "Running the world," Lily said, smiling. "She started her summer reading challenge yesterday. She's already halfway through her first book. That sounds about right. She also told me she wants to start a dinosaur club at the library." Ethan laughed softly. "Of course she does." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee, the hum of the town drifting up from below. Somewhere. A truck rumbled past. Someone laughed on the cafe patio. Life simple. Ordinary life was moving again. Lily turned toward him. "Do you ever miss it? The city? I mean..." He thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes. The noise, the constant motion. It made me feel like I was always doing something important. And now, he said quietly, "I just want to do something meaningful." She smiled. "You already are." He shook his head slightly. "You give me too much credit." "I don't think I give you enough," she said softly. There was warmth in her voice that made him look up. Meet her eyes. For a heartbeat, the room felt smaller, filled with something that didn't need words. Lily looked away first, setting her cup on the windowsill. "I saw the new reading corner you helped set up at the library," she said. "The kids love it. I figured it was time to put that scholarship fund to good use," he said with a faint smile. "Ava's future should start helping more kids than just one." She turned back to him, her expression full of quiet affection. "You still don't know how to do anything halfway, do you?" He chuckled softly. "Guess not." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, and then she said, "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He tilted his head. "You already thanked me." "Not for this," she said. "For staying." He didn't answer right away. The truth was, staying hadn't been a decision. It had felt more like breathing. The kind of thing that happens when you finally stop running. Outside, the bell from the cafe rang as someone opened the door. The familiar chime floated up to them, and Ethan smiled. "Do you remember the first time we met? You walked in, and I thought he'd laugh softly. I thought it was just another blind date gone wrong." Lily laughed, too, shaking her head. "And you looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else." "I did," he admitted, "until you started talking about the town, about the library." She leaned against the windowsill, her voice turning gentle. "And you didn't remember me." He looked down for a moment, then back at her. "I do now." That made her smile small, genuine, the kind that stays. The morning passed slowly. They talked about books, about Ava's latest antics, about the town's summer fair coming up next week. Nothing monumental, nothing dramatic, just quiet moments, strung together like beads, ordinary, but precious. Before leaving, Lily paused at the door. "Ava wants you to come to the fair with us. She says it's not fun unless you're there to win her a giant stuffed dinosaur." Ethan grinned. "I think I can handle that." "Good," she said, her smile widening. "Then it's a date, a family one." He nodded, his chest tightening in the best way. "Wouldn't miss it." When she was gone, Ethan turned back to the window. The sun had climbed higher, lighting up the town square. Below, a couple walked hand in hand past the cafe, laughing about something he couldn't hear. He stood there for a while, just watching. For years, he'd built walls made of ambition and fear. But now, here in this quiet mountain town, Those walls had finally begun to crumble, replaced not by grand plans or victories, but by the steady, gentle rhythm of an ordinary life. He took another sip of his coffee and set it down on the desk, his eyes drifting to the photo frame again. Lily and Ava, home. He smiled to himself, slow, content, full of the kind of peace that doesn't demand attention. Outside, the cafe bell chimed again, the sound carrying softly through the summer air. And as Ethan looked out over Aspen, this town that had given him back everything he didn't know he'd lost, he thought, this isn't the end of the story. It's where it finally began. The library smelled of new books and warm wood polish that morning. Sunlight filtered through the tall, arched windows, scattering golden dust across the newly built children's reading area. The air buzzed softly with laughter, the kind that only children can make light. Unburdened, pure. Ethan stood near the back of the room, watching it all unfold. Rows of bright beanbags lined the floor, and a small sign above the doorway read in colorful letters, Ava's Corner, where stories begin. He could hear Ava's voice rising above the chatter. Mommy, look. They put my name up there, Lily laughed, kneeling to her daughter's level. They did, sweetheart. What do you think I think it's perfect? Ava said proudly, spinning in a slow circle before spotting Ethan. Her face lit up. Uncle Ethan, you came. He smiled, crouching slightly as she ran toward him. I wouldn't miss this for the world. She hugged his legs tightly, and he rested a gentle hand on her hair. For a second, the sound of applause and conversation faded, and all he could hear was her small voice whispering, You helped make it real, didn't you? He smiled, but didn't answer. She looked up at him, grinning as if she already knew. The ceremony began soon after. The mayor gave a short speech. The town librarian spoke about community and hope. And then Lily was asked to say a few words. She stepped up to the small wooden podium, her fingers brushing nervously against the microphone. Her voice trembled just a little at first. When I first started working here, she began, this library was more than a job to me. It was a place that kept me warm when I had nowhere else to go. Years later, it became a home for my daughter, and somehow, for me again. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan for a brief second, soft and knowing. This new reading corner isn't just for Ava. It's for every child who walks through these doors looking for a story, maybe even the kind that helps them find themselves. The crowd clapped. Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. Pride, gratitude, something deeper. After the speeches, people drifted about, sipping coffee and admiring the space. Lily found him by the window, where sunlight poured in like honey over the bookshelves. You didn't tell me it would look this beautiful, he said, glancing around. I didn't know it would, she replied, smiling. It feels like more than just a room. He nodded. It is. They stood there for a while, neither needing to fill the silence. Children's laughter echoed behind them, bright and echoing off the high ceiling. Then Ethan reached into his pocket. I have something for you? Lily blinked in surprise. For me, he held out a small velvet box. Technically, it's for all of you, but mostly for you. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a simple silver ring, no jewels, no grand gesture, just elegant and quiet. The kind of beauty that didn't need to prove itself. Her breath caught. Ethan, what is this? He smiled gently. Not a proposal, he said softly. Just a promise. She looked up at him, confusion melting into something tender. A promise? He nodded. That I won't forget again. Not you, not Ava, not what this place means to me. I spent years chasing things that never lasted. But this feels real. I just wanted you to know that I'll keep showing up. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, You already have. Ethan took her hand and slipped the ring gently onto her finger. Then consider it a reminder, he said, smiling. For the days when life gets heavy, a little proof that someone will always be here. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Around them, the laughter and music faded into something softer, as if the world had slowed to give them space to breathe. Then, out of nowhere, Ava came bounding toward them, her curls bouncing with every step. "Mommy," she squealed. "What's that?" Lily laughed through her tears. "A gift from Uncle Ethan." Ava's eyes widened. "Is it magic, maybe?" Ethan said with a grin. "The kind that keeps promises." She gasped in delight and threw her arms around his neck. "Then you have to promise me something too." He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of promise that you'll never, ever stop coming to story time?" Lily burst out laughing, and Ethan chuckled, lifting the little girl easily into his arms. "That's a big one," he said. Ava pressed her forehead against his. "You can do it. You're strong." He smiled, his voice low and warm. "Then I promise." She hugged him tightly, and for a second, he felt something shift inside him, the quiet, profound certainty that this was where he was meant to be. The sun had begun to set outside the tall windows, casting the library in a golden haze. Dust motes floated in the light, and for a fleeting moment, the world felt perfectly still, like time itself had paused just long enough to hold this memory in its hands. Ethan looked at Lily over Ava's shoulder. She smiled, her eyes glimmering with everything they'd been through, the hurt, the healing, the rediscovery of something pure. He smiled back. They stood like that for a while, three people in a sea of laughter and light, bound not by obligation, but by choice, by love in its simplest and truest form. And in that small corner of Aspen, under the soft hum of conversation and the faint rustle of turning pages, something beautiful settled quietly into place. Later, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Ethan lingered by the shelves. Lily joined him, her hand brushing his. "You know," she said, "Ava's right." He glanced at her. "About what you do belong here." He didn't answer right away. He just looked around the room, the shelves lined with stories, the glow of the lamps, the faint scent of coffee still hanging in the air, and then back at her. "Maybe I finally found where I was supposed to," he said quietly. Outside, snowflakes began to drift down again, slow, soft, the first of the season's return. Through the window, the light from inside glowed warm against the dusk, spilling out onto the street like a beacon. Lily leaned her head against his shoulder, and he exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and gratitude. Ava's laughter echoed from the hallway, bright and unrestrained. Ethan smiled. "Sounds like someone's not ready to go home yet." Lily laughed softly. "Maybe she already is." They turned toward the sound, walking hand in hand toward the light. And as they stepped into the soft glow, surrounded by the scent of old books and new beginnings, the last of the day's sunlight caught the silver ring on Lily's finger, a quiet glimmer, a promise kept. Nothing more needed to be said. The story had already told itself. Sometimes life brings people back into our path, not to repeat the past, but to heal it. Ethan and Lily's story reminds us that kindness, even the smallest act, can take root in ways we may never see. What we give without expecting return often circles back, years later, as a quiet blessing. It also teaches us that strength doesn't always mean standing alone. True courage can be found in allowing others to help, in letting love soften the walls we built to survive. Lily's pride and Ethan's silence both came from pain. Yet they found peace when they learned to trust again, to give and to receive with grace. As we grow older, we come to understand that what matters most isn't success, or wealth, or recognition. It's the warmth we bring into someone's life, the memories we leave behind in simple gestures, a shared meal, a comforting word, a promise kept. In the end, love doesn't need grand declarations. Sometimes it's just showing up, quietly, faithfully, until the people we care about no longer feel alone. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. If Ethan and Lily's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you more heartfelt stories about love, hope, and second chances. And if today's story reminded you of someone special, share it with them. Maybe it's the message they need to hear. See you in the next video, where another story awaits.